All right, so let's talk a little bit about this problem that we've been having with the infinite loop that we're creating with our WebSockets, right? Because we saw that if this user here types too fast, that's going to create basically an infinite loop where these things keep changing and events keep getting triggered. It's a mess, right? So in order to figure out why this is happening, let's think about how the flow is currently working. Okay, because currently when this user makes a change, that sends a request to the server, which I'm just going to draw here. And the server, of course, is going to emit that note updated event to both of the connected clients, right? So it sends that event to this one, and it will send that event through to this one as well. Now, the way that we have our useEffect hook set up is whenever one of these values changes, it's going to automatically emit this event again. All right, now this wasn't a problem when we only had one side, right? When we only had one client connected. However, when both clients are doing that, what this causes to happen is when this client updates, that will trigger this event to the server, right? The same one as we had over here, which will, of course, do this same thing again. All right. And if this client has been typing too fast, that will actually cause these values to change, and that will make it so that this one triggers an event again, which will, of course, make our server trigger that same event again. And since we know that the data in this one was different than this one, that will cause this one to trigger the event again. And, hopefully you get the idea there. It's creating an infinite loop between both of our front ends. So the problem here is primarily in our front end and how it's actually handling changes, right? Because if we go back and take a look at the useEffect hook that I'm referring to, right, this one here, basically, this is going to get called whenever the title or content changes, right? In other words, whenever the value of that string changes somehow, whether that's through the socket, right, this note updated event, or whether that's through the user just making a change to one of the text boxes manually, that's going to trigger this socket.emit event. So what we need to do here is make sure, and this is just a temporary fix here, we're going to have to get into some more complex fixes later on. We're going to have to make sure that the user is actually editing this thing before we have our front end emit this event. All right, that will fix it because that'll make sure that the second client who is not editing the note doesn't actually emit this event, right? There's no reason for the client to emit an update note event if they're not even editing the note. So what we should see is after adding that, and we'll have to add this here too. We're going to say is editing as part of our dependencies there. If we go back now, what we're going to see is that we can now type as fast as we want, and that we won't run into the same problem as we had before, right? You can give that a try, and you might still see a little bit of weirdness. We're going to have to, at some point, slightly rethink the way that we're handling this. But the point is that we're no longer creating this infinite loop, which is great. Now, one other thing that you might have noticed is that even though we added this other user over here as an editor, their edit button is not showing up. Well, the reason for that, right, we want this edit button to show up, obviously. The reason for that is when we're sending back the initial data from the server, okay, when we send back the initial note data here, you might not remember this, but in our endpoints that allowed users to initially load notes, all right, if we get the list notes route here, remember that we automatically formatted each note, and what that entailed was basically adding here, let me just open that up here, format shared note. That basically entailed adding this role thing to each note. So what we're actually going to do is reuse this function here inside our io.onConnection callback. So what that's going to look like here, we're going to say socket.emit, and we're going to use format shared note. And we're going to have to import that up here as well. So we'll just say import format shared note from format shared note. And now if we refresh the page over here, that should give our user, nope, it looks like that didn't work at all. So let's see what this user is getting here. We're going to open up the inspector window, go to the console. Oh, and it looks like it's just that the server didn't start up for some reason. So let's restart our application here and see what's up. Okay, so the server's listening, the front end is working. Maybe it was just a fluke. Aha, so as a matter of fact, it was not a fluke as I hoped. So let's take a look at this problem here, see if there's any errors that we're seeing. And if we scroll up, we see that inside format shared note, we don't have this user.email thing. Now, this is actually kind of a tricky thing because it means that we're going to have to know who the user is inside this WebSocket, right? With our list notes route, we had this verify auth token middleware that automatically took care of all of that for us. Okay, and we also had this middleware that made sure a user email was verified. So what we're going to actually need to do here is add the same kind of functionality here to our WebSocket. So we're going to need to make sure for each of our WebSockets that when someone connects, we actually know who they are. All right, so that's going to be our next challenge. So I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.